QSO Today, episode 183, Geoff Howard, W0CG/PJ2DX. QSO Today is listener-sponsored by you. Options for being a QSO Today supporter are on the menu items at the top of the QSO Today homepage. Please become a listener sponsor today. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth Forzed, 1UG, your host. I would imagine that many of us, especially when we are sitting at our work desk in the cold of winter, long for tropical warmth, golden sands, and the great ham radio that operating from the Caribbean could offer. My guest this week is Geoff Howard, W0CG/PJ2DX, who operates, along with his ham friends, the P2JT contest station in a villa on a cliff overlooking the sea in Curacao. Geoff shares his ham radio story and the history of P2JT in this QSO Today. W0CG/PJ2DX, this is Eric Forzed, 1UG. Are you there, Geoff?
Eric Forzed, 1UG from, I guess I should say, W0CG/7 at the moment because I'm at my home in North Idaho in the U.S.
Geoff, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, I think we could recite this pretty much standard story and just change the name and the call sign, and it would fit for many, if not most, of your listeners. It's the same rather standard, rather boring story that goes along with our generation of ham operators. Literally bought a Morse code training set with, you'll laugh, but with bubble gum wrappers when I was about 9, and beeped away with that thing and taught myself the code. Some years later, about 12 years old, found an issue of Popular Electronics magazine in a drugstore. There was an article about how to become a ham. Became captivated, followed the steps, and found somebody in town to give me a license exam and got started that way. And the rest of the standard story sounds pretty much the same. Intense activity, mostly on CW as a teen and through high school. Almost no activity in college because of distractions of life. Very little activity in young adulthood because of distractions of life and 2 jobs, 2 parallel careers. And then finally reached a point, mid-30s, where I was able to get a breath and think again about amateur radio and get some antennas up and build some towers, and proceeded from there. So as I said, you could recite that storyline and fill in all kinds of different names and call signs, and it would pretty much fit for all of us.
How old were you when you got your first license?
I was 13, October of 63, and that was in W8 land, Wheeling, West Virginia. And it couldn't have been a worse situation because I was living at the bottom of a valley in West Virginia. Nearly everyone does. Living with my grandparents. My grandfather wasn't happy about the idea of outside antennas. So with my first novice license and call sign, WN8KUW, I didn't do very well. Did a lot of transmitting and not very many contacts, but my enthusiasm couldn't have been higher.
You're age 13, you're a WN8KUW. Were there any ham radio clubs near you that offered some elmering and some help?
There were some clubs. I discovered them later, unfortunately. I did all the preparation for the license exam on my own, bought the ARRL license manual, studied the questions. As I said, learned the CW on my own, and through lucky coincidence, as I said, I was living with my grandparents, and one of my grandmother's long ago high school boyfriends was a local ham, and she just had a vague idea that George was licensed. Picked up the phone and called him, and they reconnected after some decades. And George W8LBI was kind enough to drive down to the house because I had no way to get around, picked me up, took me up to his mountaintop QTH, administered the exam, and then I was off and on my way thanks to an old contact of my grandmother's.
And did he help you then establish maybe a more working station at your grandparents' house?
He was of some assistance when I mail ordered a Knight T50 transmitter that didn't work, and I called him in panic and he quickly picked me and the equipment up and took me up to his mountaintop, found that there was no screen voltage, replaced the resistor, and got me going. But he was a busy, busy man. He was a senior executive in the local power company, and so I pretty much found myself Elmerless, and I stumbled along knowing not nearly enough about antennas and feed lines, but I was just hell-bent to get on the air somehow, and eventually began making some QSOs.
So your first rig was the Knight T50 transmitter. What kind of receiver did you have?
Yeah, the receiver was floor model consumer electronics shortwave receiver, the kind that stood 4 feet high, and the kind that were the width of the needle on the tuning dial was about equivalent to the width of 40 meters. So it was really terrible, unbelievably crude. And to tune the thing, I would just sort of tap on the console, and that would get me up the band or down the band a bit. I had a crystal for 71, 76 only, and sat there for weeks and weeks calling CQs and calling guys until finally the magic day came and I did make the first QSO.
Did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career?
Yeah, it did. Like all of us in the hobby, we had been fascinated early on with the insides of television sets. And of course, in that era, the insides of television sets were much more interesting to look at than they are now. In fact, there were insides. And I had looked over my father's shoulder as a young boy as he replaced tubes and hauled them to the drugstore tube tester and bought new ones and replaced them. And so, I became entranced with all the colorful components inside, and I desperately wanted to know how it all worked. And my father was a sales manager for a local television station, and he would take me to his office on Saturday morning when he was working paperwork and sit me down in the control room. And the guys in there were kind enough to tolerate the little kid, and so I was exposed early on to big transmitters and big blowers and glowing orange tubes and radio towers, and was completely taken with the whole thing. So now, finally, to answer your question, then the logical thing for a chap like that to do is to study electrical engineering, and so I headed off and did that after high school, finding out much later that it probably wasn't the right thing for me, but again, I wanted to know all that I could about how the electronics worked, and so yes, ham radio and those early experiences with my father's television station did lead me to an educational choice.
Now, did you get a broadcast engineering license so that you could go back?
Yeah, I did. I found out fairly quickly that I was good at taking tests. And as we all know, an ability to take tests doesn't necessarily ensure knowledge. But I took the test for the second and then first class radio telephone license and discovered that was a good way to earn a little bit of extra money in undergrad school. And so I sat and nursed transmitters at broadcast stations in Cincinnati and collected a little bit of change for doing that.
While you were going to school?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what a cool thing. And where'd you go to school?
Charged off to the University of Cincinnati. And the reason for that is because, again, like so many others in that vintage, there was no money for me to go to college, but Cincinnati offered a cooperative training program where we alternated a quarter in school with a quarter in corporate practice. And so at the end of the 5-year, rather than 4-year program, the 5-year program, we had been paid for 2.5 years of corporate work. That helped pick up the cost of college. And when we all graduated, we might have known quite a bit more about what we were doing than people who had not had that experience and instead took a traditional 4-year engineering degree.
So you're quite hireable.
Yeah, I was quite hireable, but couldn't get hired because the other half of my college expenses came from the U.S. Air Force. I signed up as a freshman because they offered money and because they offered opportunities to get my hands on airplanes. And so I was fortunate enough to qualify for a full 4-year financial assistance grant from the Air Force, and they picked up the tab for the balance of my college costs. That was just my one and only opportunity to go to college, so I did it. And I was happy to serve, but at the end of the 5 years of undergrad school, I was required to enter the Air Force course and serve 4 years in order to pay back the money. Absolutely a fair deal, and I was completely comfortable with that. I did delay the entry of the Air Force for a year to get a Master of Business Administration degree at the University of Pittsburgh, but by then it was time, and so rather than being able to enter the job market with what at that time were golden credentials, an electrical engineering degree and an MBA, I instead entered Air Force active duty.
And what did you do in the Air Force?
Electronics.
Uh-huh.
I had absolutely desperately wanted to fly. My uncle was a Navy aviator, but I wore glasses, and in that time, the Air Force wouldn't give you the time of day if your vision was even a tenth of a point off from perfect. So great disappointment, but I wound up instead doing navigational aids work, instrument landing system, TACAN, VOR, and that was a good way to get as close to aviation as I could without sitting in the cockpit, and was assigned to an organization that was responsible for the airborne calibration and checking of ILS instrument landing system and other airborne navigational systems. So I was in the airplane, just in the back and not in the seat up front that I wanted. Was doing electronics. It was aviation-related electronics. And in my 4 years Air Force active duty, I became, through some unpredictable process, kind of the Air Force's world expert on sighting of navigational aids on airfields. Built some simulation software and figured out why some of this navigation equipment didn't work and figured out how to fix it, and then had a pretty good time flying all over the world to various bases and making those corrections.
Well, that's pretty cool. And it's my understanding that you actually became a pilot.
Yeah, right, Eric. I did. In my frustration of not being able to become an Air Force pilot, I did start flight training when I was in undergrad school. In that era, it was very inexpensive. I started taking private pilot lessons for, you'll laugh, but for $10 an hour, and had a little bit of money left from my engineering assignment, training assignments, and the Air Force scholarship, of course, was helping with tuition. So in 70 and 71, I started taking private flight instruction and very quickly attained the private pilot license, and then a commercial, and an instrument rating, and multi-engine rating, and then flight instructor instruments. And so I had a wallet chock full of pilot certificates, and fairly quickly, about 1,000 hours of flying time. But still, the Air Force would not let me touch an airplane because I wore glasses. So that was my career frustration.
Okay, but you left the Air Force, and what did you do after that? You mentioned that you had two careers.
Yeah, I left the Air Force after 4 years active duty because I had been ordered to a remote assignment in eastern Turkey. And looking back, it probably would have been a lot of fun, but at the time I was young, married, wanted no part of being away from my wife for a year, was frankly angry with the Air Force that they wouldn't put me in the cockpit. And so separated from the Air Force, went to work for the FAA, doing much the same thing that I've been doing in the Air Force at the Air Traffic Control Center in Kansas City. Did that for a couple, 3 years, and then unfortunately, divorce came along, and that changed everything. That was the end of the FAA career. And soon after the divorce, I found myself in Northeast Ohio, and had an opportunity to join the Air Force Reserve in Northeast Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, and did that and stayed with them for 26 more years. So all told, I had 30-year career in the Air Force, and very proud of that, and enjoyed every minute of it.
Now, did the Air Force Reserve give you the opportunity to fly?
No, same story. They look at the eyeglasses and they say, no chance, fellow. I don't care what you know or what you've done or how many years of aviation experience you have. We don't want you. So I spent my time in the Air Force doing communication electronics for a few years, and then most of the rest of the time as a civil engineer, and those final years as commander of a civil engineering squadron, and then 5 years after that, the last 5 years as inspector general of a large Air Force Reserve installation. And during those years, I was the ranking reservist, the non-full-time reservist on the base in the rank of colonel. And so I had a lot of fun with the Air Force career, and I feel like I rendered good service to the nation. And it was very demanding for a part-time job. So when retirement time came at the 30-year point, I breathed a sort of sigh of relief and happily hung up the uniform and walked away from my responsibilities. And concurrent with most of those 25 or so years in the Air Force Reserve, I was faculty in the University of Northeast Ohio, Kent State University, where that was my full-time day job, and I taught systems analysis and information system design and development all that time, and at the same time was trying to juggle the Air Force career. So I was pretty busy, and that made it difficult to do ham radio properly.
But I read that your first love is DX contesting. And how'd that start?
You know, I think one of the things that brings us all to ham radio is an almost genetically implanted love of wireless. And all of us were fascinated to stand in the backyard and gaze up at our antennas and imagine that there's a gentleman like you on the other end of that very, very, very long circuit, and that in between there's invisible magic happening. Now, you know, all of us could sit down and explain how propagation works, you know, and many of us can write Maxwell's wave equations, but even though we understand the math and the physics, it still seems more like magic, and I prefer to think of it as magic. And so if one is in love with wireless, the more the better. How do you get a lot of wireless in a short time? And for me and many others, that translates to contests. On a contest weekend, there are more stations on the air and more countries and more prefixes than other times during the calendar year, of course. And why DX contests? Because they're far. And if long distance wireless is fun, then DX contests, as opposed to local and domestic contests, must be the most fun. So that's why DX, because distance is fun and the exotic nations are exciting. Why contests? Because that's the best way to get a fire hose dose of wireless in a short time on a weekend. Why CW? Because it's musical, it's easy, it's soul satisfying. And I was one of the lucky ones who just had a sort of an inborn knack for it.
What is it about CW? Do you find that it's still a great mode for times when the sunspot cycle's at its lowest?
It's visceral relaxation. I'm an amateur musician, French horn primarily, and I think if you talk to a lot of the people that are in love with CW, you'll find a lot of musicians. And so for the same reasons that we all enjoy making music and listening to music, the rhythm and the sort of cognitive challenge, CW is appealing.
What is your favorite contest and why?
You know, my favorite, and this is speaking now from the PJ2T perspective, is the one upcoming in a couple weeks, the ARRL CW contest. And I enjoy that. I'm embarrassed to tell you because it's easy. We park ourselves down there off the coast of Venezuela in Curacao and only work in this contest, of course, stateside in Canada. And so what that means for us is all the signals are loud. The contacts are easy. The prefixes are well known and well understood ahead of time. And it's not particularly taxing. The challenge in that contest is rate. If we can do each operator 190 an hour and our competitors next door are doing 185 an hour, then we will win. And so I prefer that contest. Again, I'm embarrassed to admit on your interview program because it's less stress and less sweat and less work than CQ Worldwide or WPX. And many of your listeners will hear what I just said and say, oh, Geoff shame on you. That's terrible. Don't you appreciate the challenge of the worldwide? And yeah, I appreciate the challenge of the worldwide, but thank you. I'd rather go the easy way with the ARRL contest.
Do you have a favorite bug, gear, or paddle that you like to use?
No, I don't, and that's a funny point, because some of the gentlemen who come and contest with us in Curacao arrive and open up their suitcases and lovingly bring out their favorite paddles. You don't see many bugs, but you see a lot of favorite paddles. And they talk to their paddles and they sing to their paddles. And when it's time for them to operate, they insist on plugging their paddle into the radio at the shift change time during a contest. And I kind of pride myself on being able to send with anything, including a 2x4 board. So I'm clear at the other end of that paddle love spectrum.
Do you use a side swiper?
Yeah. We're all most of the paddles at PJ2T are benchers. A couple of old Vibroplex paddles are there, but to me it doesn't matter. I can send with a board if I need to.
What advice would you give to someone who may be a seasoned ham but has never participated in a contest to make them a better contest operator?
Well, first off, they need to understand that the contests are a QSO party. It's a meeting of friends on the air. All of us who do contesting, and there are a great many of us, but many of us who do it intensely know each other well. We get together from time to time at the conventions and have a chance to chat in person. So for us in the contesting community, the contests are family reunions. And so to somebody that's considering joining in, the more the merrier. We're all friends, and we could use more friends. And we enjoy meeting new people and new contesters, and enjoy hearing new call signs on the air during the contests, and absolutely embrace those ladies and gentlemen when they do jump in and join us. Also, I would tell anybody thinking about trying contesting to not be intimidated. One hears the power stations, such as PJ2T, and I don't say that with any degree of arrogance. It's just that we're big and loud and we go fast. One hears those stations on the air and could be intimidated, because if it's sideband, there's a guy sitting there talking like he's practically an auctioneer, running sometimes as many as 400 contacts per hour. The code people running in excess of 200 contacts per hour. But there's no reason why anybody should be shy or reluctant to just jump in and give us a call and give anybody else in the contest a call, because the more on the air, the more fun we have. And if a new person gets on a 48-hour contest and operates an hour and a half on Sunday morning and makes 150 contacts, that's a huge help to us who are trying to run up big scores. It's fun for the new contester, because she or he can, as I said, work a lot of countries in a short period of time. And many of the people that jump in on that basis for an hour here or an hour there quickly overcome the intimidation, and they find out how much fun it is, and they become serious. And the 2 hours becomes 4, and the 4 becomes 16, and before you know it, we've minted a new contester.
Does it take a big rig and a 100-foot tower to be a successful contest operator?
Absolutely does not, Eric. And thanks. That's the right question. I can't begin to tell you how many emails and QSL card comments that we receive at PJ2T that sound something like this. A guy in Sugar Papa in Poland will send an email after the contest and say, "Thank you for working us on 160. I only have an attic dipole and 100 watts. I never imagined that I could work into your hemisphere on 160 with this poor arrangement. Thank you for hearing us. Thank you for working us." And so it's a thrill for us when we're able to hand out contacts like that. So we hear from hundreds of folks that are using attic dipoles and backyard verticals and QRPers who say, "My gosh, great, appreciate working PJ2T. I was running 100 milliwatts on 80 meters, and you heard us and you answered us." So that's a thrill for the people with smaller stations, and it's a thrill for us on the other end to do that.
Okay, so you've mentioned PJ2T a number of times now. So now I have to ask you, what is PJ2T and what's the story behind it?
Well, the short story is that all we're doing at PJ2T is standing on the shoulders of Mr. John Thompson, W1BIH, Bravo India Hotel. John had a house built in Curacao in 1971 for contesting. And he and his friends contested from there until 1998 when age and bad health forced him to leave. And so he established contesting in Curacao in a very big way from his house. And then I followed along with a group of my friends in year 2000 and bought John's house and bought his inventory of some ham equipment that was already there and simply continued what he started. And we selected the call sign Papa Japan 2 Tango for John. It's Papa John 2 Thompson to celebrate all that he did to start ham radio contesting from Curacao. And since year 2000, I and my 20-some friends who are in our PJ2T Radio Club have continued what John started and built the place into a very large, very successful contest operation.
How active is PJ2T? I mean, is there somebody there all the time?
Not all the time, but much of the time. We believe, and I can't prove this objectively, but we're pretty confident that there have been more ham radio QSOs made using that call sign, PJ2T, than any other station in the world since year 2000, including W1AW and 4U1ITU. And the reason for that is that we're on every single contest. We've only missed one major contest, and that was because of a medical problem. Only missed one of the 6 major contests since year 2000. And in these contests, we're typically making 10 to 15,000 QSOs in a weekend. So as you add up the numbers, you can quickly see that we're flirting with 1 million QSOs now using that Papa Japan 2 Tango call sign. And we've made well over a second million before and after the contest while we're there. So no, there's no one there continuously, but for about 7 months of the year there is. And for those other 5 months, sporadically there are people there. And so the place is very highly radioactive. And the call sign is absolutely ubiquitous on the bands now.
Yeah, and how is PJ2T outfitted? How many stations do you have, and what's the setup there?
We have 4 permanent station setups, and then it's relatively easy to set up a 5th station if we need to do that for a large multi-band contest weekend. And then not quite so easy, but feasible, and we have done it to set up a 6th station. So in the world of large multi-operator stations, we're not that fancy. I'm thinking of K3LR, W3LPL, K9CT, and others where there are 6 operating positions, 2 radios per position, 12 computers plus, 12 radios plus, 12 amplifiers plus. We don't have that at PJ2T. We will never have that at PJ2T because we're very resource constrained. And so for us, a big operation is 5 transmitters. For a multi operation, it's not as much stuff as you would like. The hardware is not as sophisticated as we would like, but we we do what we can with the resources we have.
And what kind of equipment are you running there?
For many years, Yaesu, because Yaesu Corporation was generous enough to sell us transceivers at a generous discount in exchange for advertising exposure. And now that arrangement is no longer in force, and we've switched to Elecraft K3 transceivers. And we only own 2 of those. We just bought a 3rd one that will go down there next week. We'd love to have 8 of them, but we do what we can with the money that we don't have. The amplifiers are standardized on you'll laugh, the old American AL1200, because that's a simple amplifier that we can repair in the field. We are a long way from sources of parts. We don't have good quality test equipment. It's a very, very corrosive, hostile environment to electronics there by the seaside. So the AL1200 linear amplifiers are the best for us. because they seldom fail, and when they do, we can fix them on site. Beyond that, the computers are pedestrian Windows 7 boxes, mostly Dells. And the antennas are also relatively pedestrian. There are 3 towers with good-sized monobanders, but nothing like the scale of the giant multi stations elsewhere around the world. The reason we do so well with average antennas is our magic location in Curacao.
Okay, so I think you said that you had 4 station setups, but then you just mentioned 8 transceivers. Are you running SO2R on those 4 stations?
No, we're not. It's very simple. We run 4 basic stations. You know, it would be our dream to have 8 transceivers, but we don't, and we won't. So our weekend setup, normally at PJ2T, is 4 transceivers. And we do not have a second transceiver for chasing multipliers on the band, as most of the big stations do. We rely on our operators to mentally multitask and chase multipliers. And in fact, I can talk more specifically. Next Monday, just 4 days after this interview, I'll be heading down to Curacao for the ARRL CW contest. In that contest, we'll have 8 operators. We'll be running 4 transceivers, 4 stations, and we'll just simply change operators' shifts from time to time. And so that will not be nearly as large scale in terms of hardware and software as the big multi-multiplies elsewhere in the world.
Will you be on Curacao to work Beauvais Island when they go on the air?
Hoping so. I've got quite a few good personal friends that are on that ship right now and tracking their progress and celebrating what they're doing. And at the same time, I'm happy to be sitting here in my warm chair at home and not be out there on the high seas throwing up over the rail. Yeah, it's very much in our plans to work our friends on Beauvais.
Okay, so you mentioned John Thompson, W1BIH, and being on Curacao, but why Curacao? Why not the U.S. Virgin Islands or some other place like that?
That's the absolutely right question. One reason for Curacao is because it's technically a South America radio country, which means that every contact we make in the CQ Worldwide contest with the U.S. earns us 3 points. That's because we are South America working North America. Different continent gets you 3 points per contact. If we were in the Virgin Islands, it would be North America working North America, and we would only score 2 points. So I'm saying, and what I'm saying in a different way is that it's not possible to win the CQ Worldwide contest from the Caribbean unless you're in the extreme Southern Caribbean, which counts as South America, which counts as 3 points per contact. So there's one reason for Curacao, and I did years of research before deciding that Curacao was the place for our station. Second reason is that Curacao is south of the hurricane belt. There's not been a major hurricane there since the 1870s. We do get a tropical blow now and then, but nothing that's ever broken even a wire antenna. And the nominal hurricane belt is migrating north. It's migrated about 100 miles north even since I've been in Curacao for 18 years. So while a hurricane could come tomorrow, the odds are low. Third, Curacao is a very advanced nation with an advanced infrastructure, phenomenal air service. We have the longest runway in the Caribbean, multiple flights per day from nonstops from Europe and the U.S. So getting in and getting out is affordable and easy and convenient. Another reason for Curacao is because it's a large industrial nation, and so you can buy things there. You can go to the store and buy the hardware you need. We have 2 Radio Shacks on the island, and it's a very highly civilized place. Another reason for Curacao is that it's the friendliest place I've found on the planet. In my Air Force career, I've been around a lot, and I spent significant amounts of time living in other nations, and I found Curacao to have the friendliest, most welcoming, warm, truly kind people anywhere on the planet, and that's a delight. And then finally, and probably most important, we're all familiar with the equatorial anomaly, which is that HF propagation is known to be best between 10 degrees and 15 degrees north latitude. We are at 12.5 north latitude, and Curacao, right in the middle of that sweet spot for HF propagation. So those are all the many reasons that Curacao is attractive. And as a corollary, I'll also say that we're quite geologically stable. It's not volcanic. The probability of earthquakes is very much lower than in the Ring of Fire islands, such as St. Martin and all the way proceeding south, Montserrat, as we well know, all the way down to Barbados. Curacao safe, it's friendly, it's affordable, and it's warm and sunny every doggone day of the year.
Well, it sounds to me like you should be on the Curacao Ham Radio Tourist Board. It makes me want to grab my hat and come down.
Well, good. Then I'm doing my job well.
What are the opportunities for a non-Caribbean resident to do a DXpedition to Curacao?
100%. Anybody, anytime is absolutely welcome to email me and say, can I come to Curacao? I'd like to operate. Can I come to Curacao? I'd like to be on a contest team. And that's happened many times in the past. We're not exclusive. Anyone is welcome at any time. And what we have done in the past when people make that contact and say, hey, I'm interested in becoming part of PJ2T, is we invite them to come and join us for a contest and check us out and see what the place looks like, see what it feels like, get to meet some of the folks that are on our teams and make their own determination whether we're axe murderers or whether we're nice people. And then based on a contest trip to Curacao, then they can decide if they want to continue with us, and we can decide if they're going to be comfortable as members of our teams, and we go from there. Also, many times I'll receive an email from a cruise ship passenger. Hey, Geoff, we're going to be in Curacao on X date. We'll be in port for 8 hours. Is there any chance that we can see the station? And well over 100 times I've hopped in the truck and gone to the port in the morning and picked up a visiting cruise ship ham and or his ex-YL or friends and taken them out to the station, and we have lunch and they operate if they wish, and then I run them back to the port. So we have visitors that way. Also, many times over the years, I'll find myself in the backyard working and see the 8 fingers come up over the wall, and then the face peering over the edge of the backyard wall in Kilroy is here fashion. Hi, I'm a ham operator. I'm vacationing on Curacao. Just wanted to see this place. May I come in? And we love it when that happens, of course. And we've opened our arms to many, many, many itinerant visitors who've dropped by just to say hello, or drop by to operate, or in some cases drop by to rent the station. And I'm quick to say that we've cut way back of late on renting the station because it's become too complex for people to handle without one of us there to help. Now, during the times that there's someone from our group that's familiar with the station and all the many buttons and knobs and dials, then we're happy to have people come and rent the place. And of course, selfishly, that rental revenue helps us stay alive and buy amplifier tubes and replace bad computers and so forth. But yeah, in broad strokes, the answer to your question is everyone's welcome. We have a lot of fun down there, and we certainly don't want to keep it all to ourselves.
Okay, now, when we started this conversation, I was actually thinking you were either in Ohio or Curacao, but in fact, you're in Idaho. With a place like Curacao, what are you doing in Idaho in the middle of the winter?
Well, I'm a guy who's had an excellent professional career and been thrilled with every bit of it and really pretty successful in my careers, but who has mucked up his personal life. And I've been divorced twice, I'm sad to say, and the second divorce came in 2008 when my wife of 30 years asked to have her freedom. And soon after that, I was encouraged by an old friend from Idaho to come visit him for the weekend and just to get away from the divorce and get away from the troubles and get away from the hard feeling and just get a break for the weekend. And the first day I was here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, he introduced me to one of his old friends, and I've now been with her for 10 years. So surprise, surprise, life throws unexpected curveballs at you. And my partner Dorothy here still has a very demanding full-time job, so she couldn't come live with me, so I opted to come to her town and live with her. And so I'm here in this wonderful home that we bought together in Idaho for the majority of the year. I still have the family home that's left over from the divorce in Ohio near Kent State University. I still do teach part-time at Kent State University, so I hung on to that house so that my kids can stay there in the summer and at Christmas, so that I can stay there and when I'm teaching at Kent, and so I can play with the radio because there are 3 nice towers at that place in Ohio. So I'm living a complicated life. Some months here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, a couple months a year in Ohio at the actual W0CG QTH, and then about 5 months in Curacao trying to keep all those balls juggled and in the air at the same time.
Now, before we started, you mentioned that you can't have any antennas and stuff in Coeur d'Alene. How are you operating ham radio while you're there?
Well, I'm not. I've learned in my 10 years here with Dorothy that I can live without ham radio because I get lots and lots and lots of it in Curacao. And I also, of course, learned the lesson of the wisdom of the ages that being with someone who loves you is more important than playing with toys. Very recently, we've begun to experiment with remote operation of the Curacao station. We're doing that in a very small way and in a prototypical way. And I've been able to do a bit of that from the location here in Idaho over the internet. But frankly, it's a minor activity. And my days and nights are ham radioless here in Idaho the last 10 years, and I'm surprisingly fine with that.
Are you still flying?
Very, very little, because I find myself too busy to do it. And the thing about aviation is that in order to do it properly, you have to do it a lot. And so I'm not teaching flying anymore. I do have a couple local aviation buddies, and I fly with them now and then here in Idaho. But I'm professional enough to know that it's not a good thing to do aviation unless you do it a lot. Proficiency levels decline rapidly. And so rather than doing a poor job at it a little bit, I'm not doing it hardly at all here. That doesn't mean I may not go back someday, but at present, no. And am I a builder? I've found myself drawn in the ham radio world to tower and antenna work. I know electronics, and I have a lot of electronics bench experience, and I can do all that. The engineering degree and a professional engineer's license and all of that wallpaper, but I enjoy the outdoor work, and I enjoy the tower construction and antenna work more. So I'm the guy in Curacao that's on the air, on the towers, 95% of the time. I had other friends in the Curacao group who were climbers, but they've all fallen away, all for good reasons. And so I'm sort of the one-man antenna crew and tower crew at the Curacao station now. And am I a builder? I've built 4 houses for myself, including that house back in Ohio, which is partly why I'm so reluctant to let go of it, because it's my life craft project. Every wire, every pipe, every board, I did it myself. So yeah, I enjoy doing that kind of construction also. And I'm always much happier with tools in my hand than, frankly, sitting at a rig and making QSOs.
Do you like the tools in your hand more than teaching at Kent State?
Yeah, I think I do. Since I retired from the university, at least from full-time teaching there, I've been having a great time getting back to the workbench. And a little bit of teaching, 1 or 2 courses per year, is enough. And that teaching is easy for me because I meet the students for about 3 weeks at the beginning of each semester, get to know them, and then we finish the rest of the term using distance technology. And that works for them, and it works for me. And as long as my academic chairman keeps calling me to teach, I'll continue doing it. It's a lot of fun, but I would sure not want to go back full time.
Yeah, we live in amazing times for you to have that ability to do that.
Yeah, and doing this interview at this moment is an exemplar of that.
Well, that's absolutely true. I'm in Israel, and you're in Idaho.
And how many time zones separate us now?
But maybe we're 9 time zones?
I think it's more than that because I'm 8 hours away from GMT.
And I'm 2 hours ahead of GMT.
Yeah, we're 10 hours time shifted. It's 10 a.m. my local time here.
And it's almost 8 p.m. my local time.
So there's our technology.
Isn't that amazing? As I tell people, it only takes $1 trillion worth of infrastructure to make this conversation, unlike ham radio.
Well, Eric, my words exactly, because when I meet a layperson and I tell them that I do ham radio, I get the same puzzled look that we all do. Why would you want to do that when you can have a text chat with a guy in Bulgaria on your smartphone? And my answer is always the same, because there's $1 billion of infrastructure between my smartphone and that other smartphone in Bulgaria. Where's the fun in that? In ham radio, we can poke a wire up in our backyard and reach that guy in Bulgaria with no intervening infrastructure. Nothing beats that.
That's absolutely true. And by the way, the local hurricanes that went through Puerto Rico and the part of the Caribbean that you're not in demonstrated that all that infrastructure can get easily blown away.
Yeah, yet again, it's been proven so many times. I was fortunate to be able to live on St. John, Virgin Islands, for 5 months in year 2000. So I know a lot of those hams on the island still. And they reported to me that for some weeks after the hurricanes, there was only one channel of communication off of St. John, and that was the guy with the 2-meter rig.
What excites you the most about what's happening in ham radio now?
There's no single answer. I'm thrilled to see that contesting is on the rise, because selfishly, I think it's a lot of fun. So I want other people to think it's a lot of fun. And the number of logs submitted to these contests year by year continues to increase very dramatically. So I'm excited by that. I'm also excited to see that CW is not dying. Many of us CW aficionados thought that when the requirement for Morse code was dropped as a licensing requirement, that would be the end of CW. But just the opposite has happened. We've seen in the U.S. Increasing numbers of people coming into ham radio because now the entry barriers are somewhat lower. But once they get in, many of them become curious about CW and learn it and are doing it. It's a thrilling surprise. And I continue to be excited about ham radio because I see young people still developing an interest in the hobby, and it leads them to careers. And I'm additionally excited about ham radio because it is a diplomatic methodology. The more people we meet around the world, and we meet a lot of them through PJ2T, the more we all understand that all of us want the same things. And even though our governments may be at odds with each other, the people seldom are. And my biggest delight in everything that we've done at PJ2T has been not the technology and not the 400 contacts per hour and not the plaques that we win and not the attention that we receive, but the diplomacy we've done. We've spent many, many hours sitting around the table at dinner at PJ2T with ham operators and their wives, and in some cases their kids from all around the globe. And we found that we're all alike and we're all the same and we're all courteous and respectful of each other. And to the degree to which ham radio is an agency for all of that diplomacy, I'm very excited.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's one thing that we all have in common is our love for radio. What advice would you give to new or returning hams then?
Well, again, don't be shy, and don't be narrow. By shy, I mean get on the air, call the other guy, make a contact. If you don't feel like you understand exactly how to do that, people will help you as you proceed. Don't be shy in terms of calling CQ. The ham bands are quieter than they ever have been. And we know that that's not because they're dead. We know that it's because there are too many listening and not enough transmitting. We'll listen to a dead band in Curacao and think, my gosh, 15 is kaput. But just for grins, we'll transmit a CQ and suddenly there's a pile up. So don't be shy. Get on, make contacts, and transmit. Don't just listen. What I mean by don't be narrow is ham radio is a wonderful supermarket of toys. We have moon bounce, we have UHF, we have CW, we have digital modes, we have mobile and field operations, and everything in between. There's a huge array of modes in which we can operate and bands on which we can operate and technologies that we can employ. One would be shortchanging himself to get involved in only one aspect of this very broad and fascinating and diverse hobby.
Geoff, I want to thank you so much for joining me on QSO Today. And I hope that at some point I'll have a chance to get to Curacao and get to see PJ2T in person. But with that, I want to thank you so much and wish you 73.
Eric, it's a pleasure. I'm glad to have had the time to share the story about PJ2T with you and your listeners. And again, I encourage anybody that's interested in visiting us to make contact. And I hope you're at the front of that list.
Thank you. 73.
73, Eric. Bye-bye.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Geoff. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in W0CG/PJ2DX in the search box at the top of the page. If you'd like to sponsor the transcription of this episode or any of the previous QSO Today episodes into written text, the cost is $67. There is a button on the right side of the show notes page to start this process. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. There are buttons on the show notes page for this. Become a listener sponsor, monthly or annually, by clicking on the sponsor buttons at the top of the page. Tell your friends about the QSO Today podcast. Finally, let Amazon pay us at no charge to you by using our Amazon link on the show notes pages before you enter Amazon to do your shopping. Amazon gives us a small percentage of everything that you buy. Your privacy is assured as we do not see who is purchasing and what is being purchased. By supporting the QSO Today podcast, you offset my out-of-pocket expenses to record, produce, and host now over 183 episodes of QSO Today. I am extremely grateful for your support. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio, in addition to the iTunes Store and a host of podcast services and applications. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.